Do you believe in twists of fate? Bruce Harris, an arrogant millionaire, had no idea his life was about to be turned upside down when he crossed paths with Beverly, a girl willing to do anything to save her brother. What begins as an explosive confrontation soon reveals a web of lies and a past he can no longer ignore. But can money buy redemption? Bruce Harris was the kind of man who seemed to have everything under control. A millionaire and owner of a tech empire shaping the world around him, he exuded confidence in every calculated move. His life was a meticulously planned script, where improvisation had no place. Surrounded by luxury, he isolated himself from the chaos of humanity, observing life with the coldness of someone who believes everything can be bought: loyalty, feelings, and everything in between. Yet, beneath the flawless suits and distant gaze, there was an emptiness he refused to confront. That morning, Bruce was heading to an important meeting, the kind that would define the course of yet another multimillion-dollar deal. He navigated his sleek sports car through the bustling streets, the soft sound of jazz filling the cabin. He loved the control driving gave him, the power to steer, even if only for a few fleeting minutes. But something unscripted awaited him that morning, something no amount of money could prepare him to face. Beverly Adams entered his life as abruptly as she was impossible to ignore. A small, determined, and desperate girl who seemed indifferent to the rules that governed Bruce's world. He saw her appear out of nowhere, running as if her life depended on it, and before he could react, she was in his car. Not the passenger seat, of course, but the trunk, moving with a speed that left him stunned. In seconds, Beverly had vanished, taking something he couldn't immediately identify. The first moments after the theft were pure disbelief. Who would dare steal from Bruce Harris? He, who was used to being feared and revered, was now the victim of a petty crime? Adrenaline surged through his veins, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Watching the girl run, Bruce felt an impulse he couldn't suppress. It was more than anger, it was the need to regain control. The chase began before he had time to rationalize. He bolted from the car, sprinting through the streets after Beverly, the sound of his footsteps echoing in his mind. Bruce didn't know what drove him more, the desire to retrieve what was his or the pure curiosity to understand who this girl was. She seemed so small, yet there was something in her eyes that screamed bravery. Little did he know that this very bravery would soon make him question everything he thought he knew about life. As they raced through the streets, Bruce found himself analyzing the situation. How desperate would someone have to be to steal in broad daylight? He had never understood the concept of desperation. To him, life was always a matter of effort, money, and competence. It had always been a simple equation, but Beverly was about to disrupt all the variables. When he finally cornered her in an alley, Bruce noticed something that momentarily disarmed him. Beverly didn't look scared. In fact, there was a determination in her eyes he couldn't decipher. "Why did you do it?" he asked, expecting an answer that would justify his anger. But Beverly said nothing. She simply looked at him, as if her reason was too obvious to explain. Slowly, the situation began slipping out of Bruce's tightly held control. He realized that what was at stake wasn't just a bag of supplies. It was something bigger, something he couldn't yet identify. Beverly seemed to be protecting a secret, and for the first time, Bruce found himself drawn to the mystery. Something told him that this girl and her past could lead him to a twist he was far from prepared to face. Deep down, Bruce knew he should let her go. There was nothing to gain from chasing a teenage thief. But something within him, an instinct he preferred to ignore, wouldn't let him give up. Beverly represented a challenge, a doorway to a world he didn't understand. And although he didn't yet realize it, this would be the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. Bruce had never liked losing, but there was something about Beverly that challenged him in a different way. When he finally cornered her, he saw that she was clutching a bundle of electronic supplies, batteries, wires, and a few tools. Nothing valuable enough to justify a chase, but her expression told a different story. "I need this. I can't give it back," Beverly said, without a hint of fear. Bruce was momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence for someone used to negotiating billions without hesitation. Despite his irritation, Bruce couldn't ignore the audacity of this girl. Who was she to stand up to him like that? "This isn't my problem," he replied, trying to shake off the growing discomfort that was making him feel vulnerable. Beverly, however, didn't back down. There was something deeper in her tone, as if she were protecting something or someone. Bruce realized that the only way to find out was to push his own boundaries. When he threatened to call the police, Beverly took a step forward. "Go ahead," she challenged, though her eyes betrayed her pride. There was a glimmer of desperation, something Bruce recognized without wanting to admit it. He hesitated, unable to decide whether he should just walk away or follow through on his threat. Why was he so affected by this situation? He was Bruce Harris. It wasn't his responsibility to save someone from their mistakes. Beverly, however, didn't let him off that easily. "If you're going to call the police, you might as well understand what's going on first," she said, crossing her arms with the defiance of someone who had weathered far worse storms. Bruce didn't know what compelled him to listen, but there was something familiar in her tone. It echoed a part of himself, a version that had once fought against the odds to survive. "You have 5 minutes," Bruce replied, trying to mask his curiosity. Beverly didn't waste any time. She explained that her younger brother was gravely ill and that Rose, her older sister, was doing everything possible to keep them afloat. She described how the stolen tools were meant to fix the generator that powered Jamie's medical equipment. Bruce, who had always viewed money as the answer to every problem, was struck by the brutal simplicity of her explanation. He tried to suppress the growing unease, telling himself this wasn't his problem. Yet Beverly's determination kept him rooted to the spot. He knew he could easily resolve the situation with a phone call or a donation, but something in her unyielding demeanor held him back. He didn't want to get involved, but at the same time, he couldn't walk away. The situation felt like a literal dead end. Beverly had nothing to offer in return but her word, and Bruce had no reason to trust her. "Why didn't you just ask for help?" he questioned, his tone a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Beverly responded with a bitter smile. "Because no one helps people like us?" Her words echoed in Bruce's mind, even as he tried to rationalize what to do next. Bruce knew he wasn't a hero, nor did he intend to become one. He had always believed that people like Beverly were the result of their own choices. But for the first time, he felt something deeper than irritation. It was as if her resilience was slowly chipping away at the walls he had built around himself over the years. The idea of simply walking away felt increasingly impossible. Bruce found himself standing in the same spot, grappling with something he couldn't explain. It was a discomfort mingled with genuine curiosity. Who was Beverly? And why did this situation feel more significant than he was willing to admit? Although he hadn't yet made a decision, Bruce realized that something inside him was shifting. It wasn't just about Beverly or what she had done. It was about what she represented, a call he was desperately trying to ignore. Bruce was determined to leave the matter behind. He had seen enough. Beverly's excuses and her touching story didn't change the facts. She had stolen, and he didn't want to get involved. As he walked back to his car, each step felt heavier. "This isn't my problem," he repeated to himself, as if trying to convince himself could erase the nagging feeling that had gripped him since their encounter. Even so, Beverly didn't back down. She followed him, without apologizing or pleading for compassion. She just stared at him with a look full of determination and a hint of desperation that Bruce preferred to ignore. "You have more than enough money to not miss any of this," she said, with the bluntness that only someone with nothing to lose could muster. He scoffed, annoyed. It wasn't about the value, it was the principle, or so he told himself. Back behind the wheel, Bruce tried to clear his head. It was just another day in his complicated life. Other people's problems had no place on his agenda. But no matter how hard he tried to forget, Beverly's stare continued to haunt him. He kept replaying her words, the firmness in her voice, and something inside him twisted. He hated it. He hated the idea that maybe this was more than just a petty theft. He attempted to regain control of the situation as he always did. He called local security, reported the incident, and provided the approximate location where he had found Beverly. With the issue seemingly out of his hands, he felt a brief sense of relief, but also a pang of something he didn't want to acknowledge. Why did he still care? He wasn't supposed to feel anything beyond irritation. And yet, there he was, lost in thoughts that led nowhere. For the rest of the day, Bruce tried to get back to his routine. Meetings, phone calls, multi-million-dollar decisions, it all seemed to run on autopilot. But between tasks, Beverly's words kept creeping back into his mind. He realized he was more affected than he wanted to admit. It wasn't just her audacity that bothered him, it was what she represented, a reality he had never confronted head-on. When night fell, Bruce found himself alone in his luxurious apartment, surrounded by silence. It was strange how that silence, which had once brought him comfort, now felt oppressive. He looked around, noticing the stark contrast between his life and Beverly's. Why did this bother him so much? He couldn't say. He just knew the discomfort wouldn't fade easily. As he tried to sleep, the questions began to flood his mind. Why did Beverly have to do what she did? Where were the adults who were supposed to help her? And most importantly, why was he still thinking about it? Bruce hated feeling out of control, and this situation was slipping entirely beyond his grasp. He needed answers but didn't want to admit he was getting involved. The next morning, Bruce woke up with the same sense of unease. It was as if his encounter with Beverly had planted a seed in his mind. He didn't want to get involved, but he also couldn't ignore it. "This isn't my problem," he repeated to himself for the 100th time. But the more he said it, the less he believed it. Finally, Bruce made a decision he didn't fully understand. He didn't know what he would do, but he knew he needed to go back. Not to help, he told himself, but to understand. There was something about Beverly, something about that situation, that wouldn't let him move on. He needed to face it, whatever it was, even if he didn't yet know why. When Bruce returned to the small apartment where Beverly lived, he wasn't sure what he was looking for. Perhaps it was answers, or maybe a reason to prove to himself that he was right not to get involved. When he knocked on the door, he was greeted by Rose, a woman with dark circles under her eyes, her hair tied back in a hurried bun, and a gaze that mixed weariness and distrust. It was clear she was used to carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and it showed in every movement. Rose tried to maintain a firm posture, but it was evident she was exhausted. Still, she invited him in, though she couldn't hide her discomfort at letting a stranger into her home. The cramped space was filled with improvised belongings, old furniture, stacked boxes, and a corner set up for little Jamie, lying on a mattress surrounded by rudimentary medical equipment. Bruce looked around, trying to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just poverty, it was survival at its most extreme. As Rose explained the situation, Bruce felt something he didn't expect: empathy. She shared how she had lost her parents in an accident and had taken on the responsibility of raising Beverly and Jamie. Working 2 jobs, she could barely keep the household afloat or cover the costs of the experimental treatment Jamie needed. Her voice was strong, but her hands trembled as she described the constant fear of being unable to protect her family. Bruce, who had always avoided emotional entanglements, felt the weight of her story pressing on his chest. Beverly appeared in the middle of their conversation, suspicious and ready to defend her family. "Why is he here?" she asked, glaring at Bruce as though he were an enemy. Rose sighed and answered, "He wanted to understand what's going on." Bruce, who had always been in control of every interaction, didn't know how to handle such raw honesty. He realized he wasn't dealing with people asking for help. They were fighting with everything they had, and he was nothing more than an awkward spectator. As Rose spoke, Bruce noticed something that moved him deeply. She wasn't asking for anything. Despite the hardships, she wasn't begging for pity or charity. Rose spoke with dignity, like someone determined to fight to the end, even if it meant losing. Bruce felt a wave of respect he had never experienced before. For the first time, he began to question his own beliefs about effort and deservingness. Jamie, the sick boy, coughed in the corner of the room, bringing an uncomfortable silence to the conversation. Bruce glanced at him and saw how fragile he was, yet still fighting to survive. He thought of all the times he had dismissed similar stories, telling himself they weren't his problem. But this time, something shifted. Jamie wasn't just a statistic or a lost cause. He was real. He was someone. As Bruce left the apartment, he felt the weight of everything he had seen. He didn't know what to do with it. All his life, he had believed that money was the solution to any problem. But here, standing in front of Rose, Beverly, and Jamie, he realized that money was merely a tool. What this family needed was something he wasn't sure he could give: commitment, time, and most importantly, humanity. On the drive back home, Bruce tried to convince himself that he had done enough by not calling the police. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He had seen something he couldn't ignore, even if he wanted to. Rose and her family had planted a doubt in his mind, and Bruce hated doubts. He needed to understand why this was affecting him so much. As he drove, Bruce mentally replayed every word from Rose, every look from Beverly, and every fragile sound from Jamie. He realized that his mind was different. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond control or anger. He felt empathy. And it scared him. But at the same time, it pulled him towards something greater. Something he couldn't yet name but knew he couldn't avoid. The decision to return to Rose's apartment wasn't an easy one for Bruce. He wrestled with every instinct telling him not to get involved. But deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen. When he knocked on the door for the second time, Rose looked surprised. Bruce, who had always mastered controlling situations, now found himself in uncharted territory. He didn't know what to say, but the words came out before he could think. "I want to help." The sentence hung in the air, as strange coming from Bruce's lips as a promise in a business contract. Rose frowned, her skepticism clear. "Help how?" she asked, in the tone of someone who had heard too many empty promises before. Bruce hesitated. He had never had to justify his intentions before. "I'm going to take Jamie to a better hospital. He needs urgent care." It was a statement, but also a request for permission, something Bruce never imagined himself asking. Beverly, watching the scene with her arms crossed, glanced at Rose with a mix of hope and caution. "Why would he do that?" she asked, her voice heavy with understandable distrust. Rose took a deep breath, considering. She knew she couldn't afford the treatment Jamie needed, but accepting help from a stranger felt risky. Bruce saw the conflict in her eyes and added, "I don't want anything in return. I just want to make sure he has a chance." Reluctantly, Rose agreed. That same day, Bruce arranged everything to take Jamie to the city's best hospital. When they arrived, the contrast was stark. The modern facilities and attentive doctors were a world apart from the limited resources the family had relied on before. Bruce watched as Rose held Jamie's hand while he was taken in for tests. It was a simple gesture but full of strength. For the first time, Bruce witnessed the weight of unconditional love up close. As Jamie received care, Bruce found himself unexpectedly affected by the situation. He, who had always prided himself on his unshakable logic, now felt overwhelmed by emotions he didn't know how to handle. Watching Rose and Beverly, he realized how accustomed they were to fighting without support. Bruce felt a mix of admiration and discomfort. He wondered how many times he had ignored people like them throughout his life. At the end of the day, the doctor gave a clear diagnosis. Jamie would need expensive experimental treatment to have a real chance at survival. Rose closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, as if summoning the strength to face yet another battle. Bruce, on the other hand, felt something he couldn't name. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about money. It was about being part of something bigger than himself. When Bruce offered to pay for the treatment, Rose hesitated again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice filled with exhaustion and curiosity. He didn't have a clear answer. Maybe it was Jamie's gaze, Rose's resilience, or even Beverly's audacity. All he knew was that he could no longer ignore the feeling that this was the right thing to do. "Because I can," he replied without meeting her eyes. In the days that followed, Bruce became more involved than he had anticipated. He arranged for the family to move to a safer place while Jamie began treatment. Every step felt like unfamiliar territory, yet strangely natural. It was as if, by helping Rose and the children, he was recovering something he hadn't even realized he had lost. Despite everything, Bruce knew the journey was only beginning. Each new day brought challenges, for Jamie, for Rose, and even for himself. But for the first time in years, Bruce felt like he was experiencing something real. Something that couldn't be bought or controlled. And it scared him, but it also drew him in like nothing ever had before. Bruce began to realize that his decision to help Rose and her family came with challenges far beyond financial ones. He was used to solving problems with money, but living alongside these people forced him to confront issues he couldn't delegate or avoid. Jamie, despite his frailty, was a constant source of inspiration. The boy faced each step of his treatment with a courage Bruce could hardly comprehend. At the same time, Rose still kept a wall between them. Although she accepted his help, she seemed hesitant to trust him completely. Bruce understood. After all, he was a stranger who had suddenly appeared, offering solutions to problems she had been carrying for years. But this bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. Why did he feel the need to prove himself worthy of her trust? Beverly, on the other hand, seemed more open. She began to see Bruce as someone who, although reluctant, was there for them. In an unexpected moment, she even made a joke, saying, "I bet you don't run that fast when you're late for your meetings." Bruce laughed for the first time in a long while. That small, light-hearted exchange made him realize just how much he was connecting with them, even if subtly. But not everything was harmonious. Outside that small circle, Bruce faced resistance from his former colleagues. Some didn't understand his change in behavior and saw his dedication to the family as an unnecessary distraction. "You're losing focus," they said. "This isn't like you." Bruce, who had always valued his reputation, now found himself torn. He knew helping Rose was the right thing to do, but dealing with others' judgment made him uneasy. Bruce's internal conflicts deepened when Jamie suffered a setback. The boy was fighting against time, and for a moment, it seemed the treatment wasn't working. Bruce felt a sense of helplessness he had never experienced before. He had always believed he could solve anything with the right resources, but here, there were no guarantees. For the first time, he realized that money wasn't enough to control fate. The relationship between Bruce and Rose also had its ups and downs. He tried to help her in every way possible, but Rose wasn't the kind of person who easily accepted relying on others. She felt grateful but also vulnerable, which put her on the defensive. Bruce, on the other hand, began to understand that helping wasn't just about offering solutions, it was about being present, even when things seemed hopeless. The days at the hospital brought unexpected moments of connection. Bruce started spending more time with Jamie, reading stories and making jokes to distract him from the pain of his treatment. He was surprised to realize he enjoyed those moments. Beverly, for her part, grew closer, asking curious questions about Bruce's world. "What's it like to have so much money and not know what to do with it?" she asked one day, and he realized he had never thought about it that way. At the same time, Bruce began to question his own beliefs. He had always lived with the idea that success was measured by control and the accumulation of wealth. But as he observed Rose and her resilience, he began to see that there was something deeper to life: human connections, unconditional love, and the courage to face the unknown. He still didn't know how to handle these feelings, but he knew something inside him was changing. Despite the difficulties, Bruce began to feel like a part of that small family unit. He, who had always lived surrounded by luxury, now found comfort in the little victories. A smile from Jamie, a shared glance with Rose, or an unexpected joke from Beverly. It was strange and frightening, but it also made him feel more alive than ever. The journey was only beginning, and Bruce knew there was still much to face. But for the first time, he felt like he wasn't running away. He was allowing himself to feel, even if it meant confronting his own weaknesses. And somehow, he knew that this family was an essential part of that process. Bruce began to realize that his involvement with Rose, Beverly, and Jamie wasn't something temporary. At first, he thought resolving their financial issues would be enough, but the emotions that surfaced along the way pulled him into something much deeper. A pivotal moment came when Jamie had a setback. At the hospital, Bruce watched Rose hold her brother's hand so tightly it seemed like she was transferring her own vital energy to him. That silent, powerful scene became etched in Bruce's mind. Jamie was more fragile than ever, and the doctors explained that the next stage of treatment would be risky. Bruce felt the weight of responsibility like never before. It was as if, for the first time, he was in a situation where money couldn't guarantee the outcome. He stayed by Rose's side as she listened to the news, and even without saying a word, Bruce felt the need to be a pillar of strength for her, something he had never been for anyone before. Rose, for her part, was at her breaking point. Despite the strength she always showed, Bruce could see the cracks. One night, while Beverly was sleeping and Jamie was receiving care, Rose opened up. "I don't know how you make everything seem so easy," she said, without looking directly at him. For the first time, Bruce didn't have a ready answer. He realized his entire life had been built around avoiding real emotions. And there, in front of that exhausted woman, he felt he could no longer run from them. Their relationship began to shift at that moment. Rose still kept a barrier up, but Bruce started to notice that she saw him differently. Not as a savior, but as someone willing to stay even when things got tough. That realization scared him, and at the same time, it made him want to keep going. For the first time, he wasn't just acting out of obligation, he wanted to be there. Meanwhile, Beverly became an essential element in this dynamic. She began to trust Bruce more, though not without her reservations. "You're not going to leave when all this is over, are you?" she asked one day, with a directness that disarmed him. Bruce didn't know how to respond. He, who always had all the answers, now found himself in an emotional territory he couldn't control. But one thing he knew, he didn't want to let her down. The days at the hospital became a routine filled with tension and small moments of hope. Each test, each appointment, was not just a challenge for Jamie but for everyone around him. Bruce started spending more time with the boy, trying to distract him with stories from his own childhood, stories he rarely shared with anyone. In one of those moments, Jamie smiled and said, "You're funny, you know." It was a simple comment, but it made Bruce realize the impact he was having. Outside the hospital, corporate pressures continued to loom. He received constant calls, and the criticisms from his colleagues grew louder. "You've changed, Bruce. This is going to cost you," they said. He began to understand that it wasn't just their perception of him that was shifting. He didn't entirely recognize himself either. And for the first time, that didn't bother him. Bruce also began to reflect on his own shortcomings. In Rose and Beverly, he saw a courage he had never possessed. They faced each day as a battle, while he had spent his life building a fortress to shield himself from everything. But now, by their side, he felt vulnerable. And that vulnerability, which he had always feared, was starting to feel more like a strength than a weakness. As Jamie faced yet another challenging stage of his treatment, Bruce realized he was approaching something significant. It wasn't just about saving the boy, it was about saving himself. He began to see that by facing the challenges of this family, he was also confronting his own fears and insecurities. And that was both terrifying and liberating. He knew there was still much to face, but for the first time, he didn't want to run. Being there with Rose, Beverly, and Jamie made him feel something he couldn't quite explain. Something that felt real. And that was all he needed to keep going. The darkest moment came when the doctors called Rose and Bruce into a private room. Jamie's treatment had reached a critical stage. He needed an experimental surgery, risky, but with the potential to save his life. Rose clutched Bruce's hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin, but he didn't pull away. "What are the chances?" Rose asked, her voice breaking under the weight of her fear. The answer wasn't encouraging. The chances were slim but real. It was all they had. Bruce felt the weight of that decision like a mountain pressing down on his shoulders. Rose looked at him, searching for a strength she wasn't sure she had left. "Do you think it's worth the risk?" she asked, her voice low and trembling. For the first time, Bruce realized she trusted him, even if reluctantly. "I believe Jamie deserves every chance we can give him," he replied, with a firmness he hadn't known he possessed. The days leading up to the surgery were an emotional roller coaster. Rose tried to keep herself composed to avoid scaring Beverly, but Bruce could see the tears in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Beverly, on the other hand, became more protective of Jamie, reading him stories and trying to hide her own fear. Bruce stayed close, offering what he could, his presence, his support, and the silent promise that he wouldn't abandon them. On the day of the surgery, the hospital felt colder and quieter than usual. Bruce stayed by Rose's side as Jamie was taken into the operating room. Beverly, sitting in a corner of the waiting area, stared at the floor as if trying to make time move faster. Bruce tried to say something to ease the tension, but no words seemed enough. He was as anxious as they were, though he tried to hide it. The hours dragged on as if time had come to a standstill. Each time the doors to the operating room opened, everyone turned, hoping for news. Bruce, who had always been good at controlling his nerves under pressure, now felt completely at the mercy of something far greater than himself. Rose didn't let go of his hand, and he realized he was more connected to this family than he had ever been to anyone in his entire life. When the doctor finally appeared, everyone held their breath. The surgery was a success, but Jamie will still need intensive care over the coming days, he said. The relief was immediate, but it didn't completely erase the tension. Rose began to cry, hugging Beverly while Bruce stood still, absorbing the information. He realized he was trembling slightly, as though the adrenaline was finally leaving his body. In the days that followed, Jamie began showing signs of recovery. Rose and Beverly were always by his side, while Bruce divided his time between the hospital and his responsibilities. But even when he was away, his mind stayed with them. He found himself replaying the moments of tension in the waiting room and the doctor's words. He knew this wasn't the end of the battle, but for the first time, he felt hope. The ordeal wasn't just about Jamie, it was about all of them. Rose discovered strengths she didn't know she had. Beverly, despite her young age, showed incredible maturity, taking care of Jamie and supporting her sister. And Bruce, for the first time, realized he was changing. He was no longer the man who believed money could solve everything. He now understood the value of something that couldn't be bought: being present. As he watched Jamie sleep, surrounded by machines keeping his body stable, Bruce felt something he couldn't name. It was as if this fragile, resilient boy had become a symbol of something greater. Bruce didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was ready to face it. And above all, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. The first signs of Jamie's recovery were small, almost imperceptible. A faint smile as he slept, slightly easier breaths, a weak squeeze of Rose's hand. But for that little family, each gesture was a victory. Rose seemed to breathe again, cautiously, as if afraid to let herself believe that everything might truly be okay. Bruce watched closely, feeling a sense of relief he didn't even know he needed. For the first time, he saw the tangible impact of what he had done. Rose began to show a cautious trust in Bruce. It wasn't immediate, but he could feel it. "Thank you for not giving up," she said one evening as they sat side by side in the hospital corridor. Bruce didn't know how to respond. He had never been good with emotions. "I couldn't," was all he said, but the look in Rose's eyes told him she understood far more than his words. Beverly started to change as well. Always playful and teasing, she now seemed more open, lighter. "You're not as unbearable as I thought," she said to Bruce one day while they ate in the hospital cafeteria. Bruce laughed, something that was becoming more frequent. He realized that Beverly wasn't just a resilient teenager, she was the glue holding the family together, even during the hardest moments. Jamie, even in recovery, began to show glimpses of his vibrant personality. He started talking more, asking Bruce curious questions that often caught him off guard. "Do you have a plane?" Jamie asked one day, his eyes shining with curiosity. Bruce chuckled and replied, "I do, but I think you'd enjoy it more than I do." Jamie smiled, and in that moment, Bruce felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As Jamie grew stronger, Bruce felt his relationship with Rose evolving as well. They began sharing more intimate moments, deeper conversations that went beyond the surface. Rose opened up about her parents, about the weight of raising Beverly and Jamie on her own. Bruce, in turn, started sharing his own past, something he had always kept locked away. It was vulnerable, but it was also freeing. The days of recovery brought a new routine for everyone. Bruce became a constant presence in Rose's and the children's lives, something he never imagined himself being. He started to realize he wasn't just a stranger trying to help anymore. He was now part of their story. It scared him, but it also made him feel something he couldn't quite describe: belonging. Rose began to fully trust Bruce, something that became clear when she said, "I don't know how we would have done this without you." For Bruce, hearing those words was more impactful than any recognition he had ever received in his career. He realized it wasn't just about what he had done, but about who he was becoming. For the first time, he felt like he was giving something back to the world, and it was transforming him. Beverly, always perceptive, noticed the changes. "You like us, don't you?" she asked suddenly. Bruce, caught off guard, laughed nervously before replying, "I think I do." Beverly smiled, satisfied, and he realized just how much that connection meant to her. It was as if he was becoming the figure they had never had, and that made him want to be better. As Jamie continued to improve, Bruce began planning what would come next. He didn't just want to help the family overcome the illness. He wanted to ensure they had a full and secure life ahead. But deep down, he knew this meant confronting his own fears and limitations. He wasn't just helping, he was transforming. And while that was terrifying, it was also the most real thing he had ever experienced. With Jamie recovering, the family began to glimpse something they hadn't felt in a long time: stability. But the battle was far from over. Rose faced legal issues regarding Beverly's custody. The financial difficulties they'd endured and the precarious living conditions before Jamie's treatment had drawn the attention of social services. Now, Rose had to prove she could care for her sister, leaving her in a constant state of stress. When Bruce learned of the situation, he didn't hesitate to intervene. He hired one of the best lawyers in the city, ensuring Rose had all the support she needed to fight the case. But he knew that wasn't enough. The legal battle wasn't just about paperwork and arguments. It was about showing that this family had something stronger than any accusation, an unbreakable bond. Rose, always reluctant to accept help, initially resisted Bruce's involvement. "I don't want people thinking we're taking advantage of you," she said, trying to hide her tears. Bruce held her hand and replied with a sincerity that surprised even himself, "This isn't about me. It's about giving you the chance to stay together, as you deserve." For the first time, Rose allowed her defenses to completely fall. In court, Rose displayed all the strength Bruce had always admired. With the lawyer's solid arguments and Bruce's unwavering support, she proved she was more than capable of caring for Beverly. When the favorable decision was announced, Rose cried with relief. Beverly hugged her, holding Jamie's hand, while Bruce watched the scene with a quiet smile. He knew it was a moment they would never forget. But the legal victory wasn't the only challenge to overcome. Bruce realized that, while he had done everything in his power, the real work was just beginning. He began looking for ways to offer more than just money. With Rose's help, he found a spacious, safe home for the family, a place where they could start fresh without the burden of their past struggles. The move marked a turning point for everyone. As they unloaded boxes and set up their new home, Bruce reflected on how much he had changed. He, who once saw people as obstacles or tools, now felt part of something bigger. Watching Beverly laugh while helping Jamie set up his new bed, he realized this wasn't just a house, it was a home. And he was part of it. Rose, still adjusting to the idea that things were finally falling into place, began to trust Bruce even more. She no longer saw him merely as the man who had helped them, but as someone who had chosen to stay. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said one evening as they looked at the stars from the backyard. Bruce replied simply, "I needed to. Even if I didn't realize it at first." As Jamie continued to recover and the family settled into their new life, Bruce found himself discovering a purpose he never knew he was searching for. He realized that the emotional support he provided was just as important as the financial, and this was transforming him in ways he never imagined. He was no longer the cold, distant man he used to be. He was learning to love. Yet, even with all the progress, Bruce knew this journey had much more to offer. He was learning, growing, and most importantly, allowing himself to be vulnerable. And in doing so, he wasn't just helping Rose, Beverly, and Jamie, he was saving himself. It was the beginning of a new chapter, where the past was no longer an anchor but a foundation for building something extraordinary. Bruce didn't know exactly when he stopped being a spectator and became an integral part of that family. Perhaps it was the day Rose looked at him with genuine gratitude, or when Beverly started teasing him with the same affection she had for Jamie. What he did know was that something inside him had changed. The man who once saw the world as a chessboard, where every move was calculated, now found beauty in the pieces he couldn't control. Jamie, growing stronger by the day, was the living symbol of everything Bruce had faced to get to this point. He still had tough days, but every smile, every small step forward, was a reminder that the impossible could be achieved. Bruce spent hours with him, helping with exercises, telling stories, and sometimes simply holding his hand. He never imagined he could feel so connected to another person, let alone a child. Rose had changed too. The strength that had always defined her was now accompanied by a lightness Bruce had never seen before. She allowed herself to smile more, to relax, and to trust. They spent evenings talking in the backyard of the new house, sharing dreams that once seemed so far away. Rose spoke of wanting to return to school, to build a career that would secure a future for Beverly and Jamie. Bruce, in turn, began to open up about his own fears and regrets, something he had never done before. Despite all the changes, Bruce still faced internal challenges. He found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about himself and the world. But instead of running, he chose to confront it. He knew helping Rose and the kids wasn't just about them, it was about his own redemption. And while that was frightening, it was also incredibly freeing. Bruce's transformation was evident even to those around him. His former colleagues, who had once mocked his shift in priorities, now looked at him with a mix of curiosity and respect. Bruce, however, no longer cared about what they thought. He had found something no business deal or transaction could ever offer: purpose. As he helped Rose adjust the curtains in Jamie's room, Bruce felt something he'd never experienced before. It wasn't just satisfaction or pride, it was love. Not the idealized romantic kind, but real love, built on presence, care, and commitment. He looked over at Rose and Beverly, laughing together in the kitchen, and felt, for the first time, that he belonged. The new family dynamic was imperfect but authentic. They still had a lot to learn from one another, but they were willing to try. Bruce, who had always avoided relationships for fear of being hurt, was now diving in headfirst. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it would be worth it. For the first time, he saw the future as something full of possibilities. Deep down, Bruce realized that this journey wasn't just about saving Jamie or helping Rose and Beverly. It was about saving himself. He understood that by opening his heart to them, he was healing wounds he had carried for years. And this was transforming him in ways he had never imagined. He was no longer just a millionaire seeking control. He was a man learning to love and be loved. As he watched Jamie take his first steps after the treatment, Bruce felt a wave of emotion that took him by surprise. He was there, witnessing something extraordinary, and he knew he wouldn't have arrived at this moment without that family. They had taught him to be vulnerable, to connect, and to believe that, even with all the twists and turns life brings, there's always room for new beginnings. Bruce had never thought he could find purpose beyond his professional life. But now, sitting in the brightly lit living room of Rose's new house, watching Jamie play with Beverly while Rose prepared dinner, he felt a peace he had never imagined. The transformation was subtle but profound. He had started this journey believing he could offer something to this family, but the truth was, they had given him so much more. Jamie, now stronger, had become a symbol of resilience. Every small milestone was celebrated as a victory. Bruce felt pride, not just in the boy, but in himself, for confronting his own fears and allowing that connection to blossom. "You knew I was going to be okay, didn't you?" Jamie asked one day, with the innocent confidence of a child. Bruce smiled and replied, "I always believed in you." It was a truth he never thought he'd say with such conviction. Rose, for her part, was thriving. With the security of a new home and Jamie's recovery, she began making plans for the future. "I want to study nursing," she told Bruce one quiet evening. "I want to help others, like you helped us." Bruce felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. He knew Rose had a strength that could change the world around her, and he wanted to be there to witness it. Bruce's relationship with Beverly had also evolved. Once viewing him as an intruder, she now jokingly referred to him as her new big brother. "You're still a bit annoying, but I think I like you," she teased, making Bruce laugh. He realized Beverly was more than just a resilient teenager. She was the heart of the family, always finding ways to bring lightness to even the hardest moments. As the family found stability, Bruce began thinking about how he could do more. He decided to create a foundation to help other families in similar situations. "It's not just about money," he explained to Rose. It's about giving people like you a chance to fight. Rose, moved, held his hand and said, "You're giving more than chances, Bruce. You're giving hope." On the day of the foundation's launch, Bruce looked out at the small crowd, which included Rose, Beverly, and Jamie. He gave a brief speech, something he had always disliked, but which felt important in that moment. Life is full of twists and turns, and sometimes we find ourselves in situations that challenge us in ways we never imagined. I've learned that in those moments, it's not money that matters, but the people we choose to help and the ones who help us find our way. After the event, Rose hugged him, something that had become increasingly natural between them. "You really changed our lives," she said with a warm smile. Bruce, looking at her and the kids, replied, "You changed mine." It was the first time he had admitted it out loud, and the weight of those words brought a relief he didn't know he needed. Over time, Bruce went from being just an ally to the family to becoming part of it. He, who had always avoided attachments, now found joy in the small routines, Beverly's jokes, Jamie's progress, and Rose's quiet conversations. He was no longer a lonely man surrounded by luxury. He was someone who had finally found a home. As he watched Jamie run across the backyard for the first time since starting treatment, Bruce felt an emotion he couldn't quite describe. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew he now had something he'd never had before, a family. And with them, the certainty that the future was a place full of possibilities and hope. The house, once just a physical space, now overflowed with life. The sound of laughter echoed through the halls. The kitchen was always filled with the aroma of something delicious that Rose had prepared, and the backyard became the stage for Jamie and Beverly's adventures. Bruce, who had once lived in silence in his luxurious apartment, found himself captivated by this new routine. It wasn't perfect, but it was authentic, and he began to realize that this was what he had always needed. Jamie, growing stronger every day, became a symbol of resilience and hope for everyone around him. He ran through the backyard, exploring every corner with an energy that once seemed impossible. "I'm going to be an astronaut someday," he told Bruce, with the confidence of someone who believes in the impossible. "And I'll build the spaceship for you," Bruce replied, laughing. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of inspiring and being inspired. Rose, with her characteristic determination, began preparing to enroll in nursing school. Bruce would watch her studying at night after the kids had gone to bed, feeling a pride he had never felt before. "You're going to change the world," he said in a rare moment of vulnerability. Rose just smiled and replied, "You've already changed mine." It was a simple exchange of words, but it carried a deep affection they both knew didn't need to be spoken aloud. Beverly, always the free spirit of the house, found the security of her new life gave her the space to dream. She became interested in photography, using the camera Bruce bought her to capture family moments. "Look at this one, Bruce," she'd say, showing him a picture of Rose and Jamie in the backyard. He'd look at the image and feel something that went beyond pride. It was gratitude for being there to witness it all. Bruce, in turn, found more and more meaning in his new reality. He never imagined he could feel so much joy in the little things. Helping Jamie with homework, listening to Beverly's ideas for her next photo, or simply sitting beside Rose as they drank coffee and talked about the future. He was no longer the arrogant, distant man he once was. He was someone who had learned to value what truly mattered. The foundation he had created began to grow, helping other families face challenges similar to those Rose and the children had endured. Bruce didn't just fund the projects. He got personally involved, visiting families and listening to their stories. He felt like he was finally using his position of power for something that truly made a difference. "You've found your purpose," Rose said one night as they talked in the backyard. He simply smiled, knowing she was right. The future, which had once seemed distant and uncertain for all of them, was now full of possibilities. Rose dreamed of finishing her studies and becoming a nurse. Beverly talked about exhibiting her photographs. Jamie wanted to conquer the universe, and Bruce, well, he wanted to be there, beside them, supporting every step. He knew they would still face challenges, but he also knew that together, they could overcome anything. One sunny afternoon, as they all gathered in the backyard, Bruce realized something that changed everything. He was no longer an outsider trying to help. He was part of it, part of a family. Rose stood beside him, Jamie ran around with Beverly, and their laughter filled the air. For the first time, Bruce felt that his past no longer defined him. He had a future, and it was one filled with love, security, and purpose. As the sun set, Bruce looked around and felt that he had finally found what he had been searching for without even knowing it: a full life. The journey had been difficult, filled with twists and challenges, but he knew it had all been worth it. Because now, standing beside Rose, Beverly, and Jamie, he not only had hope for the future, he had the certainty that it would be extraordinary.